ancient world, and that is the incredible ancient Greek society. There is so much to uncover that we thought we were only going to need to do one live stream lecture, but now we're going to be doing two. So we will be discussing, we got all the way to Alexander the Great, although stopped a little short of that. Talked about the Persians, talked about the Peloponnesian War, talked about the development of Greek philosophy, art, and architecture, and how influential that has been. And of course, you can't have most of modern architecture, or at least neoclassical architecture. You can't have the development of Roman society, religion, without their influence from the Greeks. And of course, that influences the entire development of the Western world. So, something else that the Greeks contributed heavily to society were mosaics. And this is a mosaic of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian and his general Belisarius. And the reason I'm picking this background is because we're going to be going through that as well. We're not going to talk about the Byzantines in perpetuity, in a great amount of detail, or in perpetuity, but we are going to be discussing the importance of the Greek society, Greek culture, and how that eventually spread and around the world, heavily influenced the Romans, and eventually would morph into other forms, becoming a huge part of the Roman Empire, and then becoming part of the Greek section of the Roman Empire after it split, the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, as it was later called, out of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, which later became Constantinople, lasted and survived for a long, long time. So this is a painting of Byzantium, which later, of course, became Constantinople and is now known as Istanbul. It's also been called Zadisgrad. It has the city of 1,000 names. But yes, it's great to have everybody here. We've got Harry, Hars, and they're my wonderful moderators. Social media handles are already in the chat. But let's, without further ado, let's get in. I'm not going to be answering questions. I'm not going to be interacting with the chat as much as I normally do, but I am going to be doing my live lecture, and we'll see when we get that over with, and we have time for Q&A afterwards. And so we're going to pick up exactly where we left off. Last week we talked about the development and the growth of Greek society, Greek civilization, who the Greeks were, how they developed. We talked about Mycenae, the Minoans. Of course, we talked about the differences between the two major city-states, Athens and Sparta. So if you want to learn more about that and the earlier parts of Greek history, go back and watch my live stream lecture from last week. I also have a long-form video about the two Greek city-states and the competition between them, the stuff of legend between Athens and Sparta, two sides of the same coin in that they were Greek, but very, very different parts on that coin. So, we left off one of the most important wars in all of history, and that is the Peloponnesian War. Now, the account of the Peloponnesian War was written by one of the earliest historians in all of time, and that is a man named Thucydides. Slightly after a man named Thucydides was another man named Herodotus, who would gather oral histories and accounts from different people, telling different legends and stories from all over the ancient world and compiling histories based on this. So Thucydides and Herodotus were two of the major historians of that time, who chronicled not just Greek history, but Persian history, the history of the Near East, the history of the Egyptians, and so on. And they are considered the first major historians. And so, despite the fact that recorded history begins about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago in Mesopotamia with the earliest writings and development of civilization and cities, which is a technical definition of history, the earliest people to actively chronicle their history as a separate subject from mythology and religion were the Greeks. And although the Chinese also kind of were doing it. But the Greeks the earliest historians are considered to be the Greek historians. Thucydides writing the Peloponnesian War is one of the first major historical accounts in all of history. And of course, you have Herodotus and his oral histories being extremely influential to the development of not just Greek history and culture, but mythologies and legends around the Greeks. And this would inspire, and the Romans would pick up the art of writing detailed histories about their own encounters from Greeks with great historians like Plutarch, Suetonius, Tacitus, and Josephus. And that's just in the first couple of centuries AD. The Romans looked at everything the Greeks did and piggybacked off of the best parts of it, be it the architecture, the art, the religious power of the polytheistic pantheon of the Greeks became the literal Roman pantheon of gods. The only difference was the Greeks were less likely to worship humans. The Romans became more and more likely to worship humans who were deified in the form of first the Caesars and then later Jesus Christ. So there's a little bit about that. We're going to be talking about how deep the Roman Empire was influenced, and Roman society and culture was influenced by the Greek stream lecture. Please like and subscribe. Become it's as easy as that. Consider giving a super chat and videos and extra bonus videos, both short and long form. Please become a member. It really helps the channel. But no pressure. Liking and subscribing is more than enough. And I hope you all are having a really wonderful Sunday and enjoying yourselves. And we've got a lot going on. here at the Friend Channel, we have our long-form videos every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. We have short videos every day, and of course, we have these lectures on Sundays and our Q&As on Fridays and Saturdays. Let me see. Okay, hopefully that fixed the lag. Okay, I did see something about the lag. All right, hopefully it's fixed. Okay, hopefully that's fixed. So yeah, let's see. Okay, hopefully that fixes the lag. Okay, didn't have my Wi-Fi on. But basically, yes, support the channel any way you want, but no pressure whatsoever. Liking and subscribing is more than enough, and I appreciate all of you guys. And we had some really good Q&As earlier this weekend, as we do every Friday and Saturday. And of course, we got the short videos and the long-form videos always available for you guys to go check out. I have one for anyone who comes to the channel to watch about the Supreme Court, and I have long-form videos, a series I'm starting for my members only on the Industrial Revolution and the different aspects of the most important technological revolution in human history. So please go check those out, and you can only check that out if you become a member here on YouTube. We also have Substack, where you can read my articles, Instagram, where you get updates and sometimes early access, and Patreon, where you get more early access to shorts and long-form videos, and you've got my First Lady series there. So, anyways, so the Greeks, so the Peloponnesian War tears apart a coalition between the Greeks that had been building throughout much of the 5th century BC. Now remember, because it's BC, it's going backwards. So when I'm talking about the late 6th century, I'm talking about 510, 520, 530. When I'm talking about the early 6th century, I'm talking about 590, 580, or 570. So the 6th century BC is the 500s, but it's in reverse because it's almost like negative and positive numbers, if you will. But anyways, what happens next? So the Greeks had built a level of harmony throughout much of the 6th century, of the 5th century, working really hard to defeat the Persians, their common enemy. This had led to them developing their own navy, thanks to Themistocles. They had also lost at Thermopylae, but won at Marathon, and eventually, using their growing naval tactics, were able to actually defeat the Persians and keep the Persians off of the Grecian peninsula. However, this harmony that's growing is going to break down. The middle of the 5th century sees the rise of the golden age of Athens. You have Pericles leading the city to all sorts of amazing triumphs and glories. You have the development of Greek philosophy at this time. You have the academy eventually being formed. So Athens and Greek culture in many ways is in its heyday in the mid-5th century. However, by the later part of the century, the rivalry between Sparta and Athens for influence over other parts of Greece are going to boil over. Now, city-states weren't just their own city that just controlled only the city. City-states usually had several different smaller cities or towns that were heavily influenced and directly considered part of their little tiny kingdom. But they could also create hegemonic influence, which was common for Sparta and Athens in the 5th century. Athens had created a series of interconnected islands between Greece and Turkey that had become extraordinarily reliant on Athenian trade, Athenian commercialism, and of course Athens, being a port city, had that in droves. So there's a formation of a league called the Delian League, which is really central to trade for Athens and for all of its neighboring partners, most of whom are island allies. Sparta has a lot of huge influence, and thank you, Kurgan, for giving out memberships. I really appreciate that. What else was I going to say? Hold on one second. Okay, so anyways, I was going to say that let me see. The Delian League is also known as the Athenian Empire, and it develops in the 5th century, and it obviously is the Athenians are on the rise. They're becoming more and more powerful, and so are the Spartans. But the Spartans have their influence on the Greek mainlands, particularly in the lower part of the isthmus, where they are located near the cities of other cities like Corinth and Thebes. This is going to eventually lead to the two large Greek city-states clashing with each other in the Peloponnesian War. Of course, it's documented by one of the first historians in all of history, Thucydides, and it's going to last 26 years. It's going to have multiple different phases, as any war that lasts 26 years seems to be. It could be considered the Greek Civil War, but it gets hairy. Eventually, despite the Delian League, despite the wealth of the Athenians, despite their golden age, they are going to lose the Peloponnesian War. The Spartans will prevail, and the Greeks are going to be extremely divided for the next 7 decades. In 405, the Peloponnesian War ends. Athens has the advantage over the other Greek city-state. I mean, Sparta does, but all the cities. But this is such a huge cost of life for not only Athens and Sparta, but for all of their satellite cities and towns that were heavily influenced them. And the Delian League is destroyed, or at least highly decimated, which is a word no one understands. But the Greeks are going to are going to relapse. They're going to plateau during the Peloponnesian War and then regress into the 4th century, whereas before they had been on the rise. After suffering the loss of Thermopylae, the Peloponnesian War is going to set them back. It's going to really hurt their population, and it's going to heavily affect the way that they. It's going to heavily affect their. Let me see. It's going to heavily affect their. Yeah. It's going to heavily affect their ability to grow and to trade. So after a century of a rise, you're going to see a decline amongst both the Athenians and the Spartans and their neighboring allies, the cities that had worked with them, the cities that had suffered and died during the Peloponnesian War. The Delian League is obviously in trouble. So so basically, Greece is going to be regressing throughout much of the 4th century. Until it is united. And Greece is not united by the Greeks. The Greeks do not do it. But it's going to be a Grecian-like Hellenistic society that will unite them, called the Macedonians. Now there is a modern country named Macedon. But the Macedonians were a northern Grecian Hellenistic people who lived up towards the northern parts of the modern country of Greece, and of course in modern-day Macedon. They had a similar Hellenistic society, but they had been tribal, but they became united. They were not as much organized into city-states as the Greeks were, and they were seen as northern barbarians by the Greeks. The Greeks really felt they were just a foreign nuisance, a northern foreign nuisance, and all sorts of other things. So what happens next? The Greeks, so the Macedonians are able to capitalize on the weakness of the Greeks, of the decline of the Greek city-states, of the city-state system, of the Delian League, of the defeat of Athens and the rise of Sparta, which is a far more militant and authoritarian society than the Athenians. It's not nearly as wealthy or powerful, but it was able, through its militaristic sheer power, to win the Peloponnesian War and set Athens back, ending the glory days of Socrates and Pericles and all of the what's called the Athenian Golden Age. And able to set them back quite harshly at that. But Sparta, through its own suffering, set back all of Greece. So, what happens next? The Macedonians come in under a king named Philip, and Philip is actually going to be the one who unites Greece. Now, a lot of people believe that it's his son, a man named Alexander, who you've probably heard of, who actually unites the Greeks. But he only solidified what his father already had set in motion. Philip is a extremely good tactician, and we talked about it last week, but he has perfected the military formation, the marching spear formation of the hoplites called the phalanx, and he has made the Macedonian army superior to that of the Greeks. The Greeks, once again, learn from history. We learn from history that no one learns from history. The Greeks certainly didn't learn from their own history that when they were divided, they were easy prey for the Persians before. Now they're easy prey for the Macedonian invaders from the north. And Philip is basically going to bring to heel much of Greece. I don't think he gets to Sparta, but he does bring Athens under his wing. And most of Greece is under Macedonian control by the time Philip is assassinated. Now, Philip had perfected the phalanx. He seems to have been an extremely competent general and strong ruler. It would have been very interesting to see what he would have done had he lived. However, power soon passes to his 19-year-old son, Alexander. Now, of course, we all know Alexander as Alexander the Great, and probably the greatest general who ever lived, maybe one of the greatest generals who ever lived, one of the greatest conquerors, a man who just swept out of nowhere and brought Greek culture everywhere because he managed to conquer most of what was called the known world at the time, and is creating an empire that stretched from the Adriatic Sea in the west, which is the sea that separates Italy and Greece, and of course the Balkans, which is all of southeastern Europe. There's that. to, of course, Afghanistan in the east, and south to Egypt, and north into Macedon and into the Transcaucasus regions. Alexander built a huge empire in a very quick amount of time because he was such a skillful and brilliant general. However, he was just a young lad starting out, and basically the only thing that he really cared about was military expansion. He wasn't an adept. He was adept enough as a general and a leader, but he wasn't ever a hands-on manager of government issues. He wasn't obsessed like a Pericles with civic building, with architecture, with things like this. He believed that the Greek culture was the best in the world, and he was sitting on the shoulders of giants. He was also trained by Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of all time. So he had a complex understanding of Greek philosophy, Greek culture, and he fell in love with those Greek symbols. And the greatest irony, perhaps, of the Hellenistic empire that swept through the world and spread the Greek language, culture, and religion everywhere it went was that it was spread by someone who wasn't originally considered to be Greek. But of course, now he's considered the greatest Greek who ever lived, perhaps. Taking the Macedonians, like the Romans will later do, love Greek culture. They adopt Greek culture, and then they spread it all over the place when they conquer. So wherever Alexander went, he would build cities. Many of them he would name after himself, like Alexandria, like in Egypt, for instance. But wherever he went, these cities would be built, and other cities would be reconstructed and renovated in Grecian style, including Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian columns. I think they had Corinthian columns by then. The Romans really get the Corinthian columns going. They may not have had those, but the different types of columns that you see on neoclassical buildings like the White House or the Lincoln Memorial, for instance, in the United States, St. Paul's Cathedral in Great Britain has this, in the UK. Neoclassical art in the 17th and 18th centuries was heavily influenced by a desire to imitate the greatness of the Greeks and the Romans, and it inspired many of the Enlightenment political philosophers and many of America's founding leaders. But Alexander is far more interested in military conquest than he is bureaucratic management of his empire. However, bureaucratic management of his empire is something that is going to be extremely important right after his death. For 13 years, he basically goes on a campaign and a conquering spree. And I also have a long-form video about the greatness of Alexander. In fact, I have several videos about Alexander because he's such a fantastic and interesting figure. Please go check them out. Alexander his main goal is to destroy the Persians. The Persians have been the major enemy of the Greeks for an extremely long time, and he feels that he could be able to, now that he has a united peninsula, now that he has a united Greek kingdom, he can actually fortify it and use all of the resources and manpower of a united Greek civilization to destroy his rivals, the Persians. And he does just that. The Greeks have a superior military might. They had just never had the unity that Alexander and his father had forced on them. So Alexander goes into Anatolia, Asia Minor, or Turkey. It wasn't called Turkey then, and manages to there's Greek settlements there, but there's always been confrontations with the Persians, who have a large empire in the Near East, and Alexander is able to quickly push the Persians out of Anatolia, and then he goes right for the throat. He goes. I'm trying to remember the order he goes in. I believe he goes then he goes south. After he gets out of Anatolia, he goes into Palestine. He manages to, one of his most famous victories is capturing the Phoenician city of Tyre. And the way he captures the Phoenician city of Tyre is by building a ramp that serves as a bridge that connects to the city, and building fortifications to protect his soldiers while marching all the way there, and being able to successfully take over the city. So that's one of his greatest victories that he's well known for. He supposedly worships the Jewish God in the Jewish temple, which has been rebuilt since the first one was destroyed. That's a little interesting tidbit of history. Alexander proves that he's not just a skillful general who's able to use Greek military power to the apex, but he's also a shrewd and an effective leader and an excellent military commander, and he has the ability to inspire his soldiers. There are many stories of Alexander's brilliance. Some of them are probably apocryphal, but written from a imperialistic lens to glaze him, basically, to make him look like an incredible, great ruler and general who men would want to follow to their deaths, which they did in many cases. One such story is that while him and his men were marching through the deserts, they were all out of water, and they found a small amount of water, and they brought it to Alexander and offered it to him and him only. And Alexander poured the water out, refusing to drink water until all of his men could find this oasis and get what he needed. Get the water that he needed. They could all get the water that they had run out of. Alexander manages to conquer Egypt. This is a huge step forward, where the master of the ancient world before, with all of its cultural apparatus, is now integrated into the growing new kid on the block, the Greeks. And again, everywhere Alexander goes, he builds cities, he sets up Greek architecture, Greek art, Greek culture spreads with him, and it's not just a colonization of these areas, it's imperialism, because the implicit notion in Alexander the Great's conquest is that the Greek society isn't just the best because of its military power, but also because of its cultural values. And these cultural values and the civilizations that have been conquered are inferior and need to learn these cultural values and accept these cultural values, or at least be willing and open to practice them. And so Greek religion, Greek philosophy, Greek art, Greek literature will become commonplace throughout all of the ancient world. And more than anything else, the Greek language becomes the predominant language that, if you are living in a certain area of Alexander's empire, and like in Egypt, and you want to communicate with someone from Persia, well, you don't speak the Persian dialect, and they do not speak Egyptian. You cannot communicate that way, but you can communicate using Greek. So what Alexander does is create a lingua franca that only the Persians before him had created, and the Romans, the lingua franca is so powerful that even when the Romans create their massive empire, Alexander's installation of Greek will remain the dominant common language, so that if you live in Roman Spain and you want to communicate with someone from Roman Italy, you might want to speak Greek instead of trying to speak Latin. Latin, of course, is the official language of the empire, but the lingua franca that allows for communication is Greek. And this all starts with Alexander's conquest, and then the Romans being so impressed by Greek culture that they realized that Greek as a language is already extremely common amongst the peoples that they conquer, and so making it a the language to speak and communicate colloquially is the best thing that they can possibly do. This is why the New Testament, for instance, is written mainly in Greek. This is why many of the ancient writers wrote in Greek, even into the Roman period. The Greeks although the Romans felt themselves superior to the Greeks, as the Greeks felt themselves superior to the Persians and the Egyptians, the truth of the matter is that the Romans found so much of what Greek architecture, religion, culture, and language, found so much good in those things. They wanted to do everything they could to integrate that into their own civilization and make sure their own people followed those principles, or at least understood them. And of course, this also includes Greek philosophy. This includes the Stoicism of Epictetus, which will become really popular in the Roman Empire, and of course, it includes the writings of Plato and Aristotle, which is the groundwork for all modern Western, all Western philosophy that's heavily influenced not just the Greeks but also the Romans. Everywhere the Greeks go, this philosophy becomes popular, and of course, will even into India will influence some of the spread of Buddhism in the South Asian region, which is seen as harmonious with a lot of Greek philosophy. Christians will find it harmonious, and Christian philosophers into the Middle Ages and even the modern period will continue to emulate and borrow from the ideas of Plato and Aristotle and other Greek philosophers. Alexander destroys the Phoenicians at Tyre. He manages to conquer the Egyptians, and he basically considers himself to be the new pharaoh. And something that is really indicative of the power of Egyptian culture is that the Greeks themselves, when they rule over Egypt, will call themselves pharaohs. The same way that the Greek language is so popular and common in the ancient world, even well after the Greeks have been subdued by the Romans, the idea of the pharaoh is such a long-lasting, strong cultural marker of the power of Egyptian civilization, which is a live stream lecture we definitely need to do, that the Greeks will continue to style themselves as more Egyptian than Greek, even though they're the line that takes over Egypt after Alexander's death, the Ptolemaic line, is not Egyptian, it's a Greek one. And despite nationalist ambitions by some of these Ptolemaic rulers to be as Egyptian as possible, you can't deny the influence that Greek religion and culture has on Egypt in the Ptolemaic line, and then of course the Romans will just continue business as usual, which is why the Romans are so successful at creating a stable peace because they have a unifying language, Greek, and they are basically going to areas that were controlled by the Greeks and influenced by the same philosophy and culture that they idolize, that it's easy for them to conquer it and keep things the same. They're not going to force some sort of huge cultural transition the way that the Greeks had done centuries before, thanks to Alexander's conquests. It's easy to do this when you are conquering at such an unbreakable pace. But Alexander's main rival is not going to be the Nubians in the south of Egypt in modern-day Sudan. His main rivalry is, of course, with the Persians. Darius III is the target of this, and Darius is often at the butt of Alexander's battles, losing multiple times, most notably at the famous battle, which you've probably all seen the mosaic. I don't have it here, of Gaugamela, where Alexander tarnishes and destroys the Persian army. I believe it's after I'm trying to remember the exact one. It might be this battle. But Alexander basically, after one battle, realizes that he has destroyed the Persian army, has broken the power of the Persian Empire, and he has absorbed a huge amount of their land into his own growing hegemonic empire. The legend says that Alexander wept, for there were no more lands for him to conquer. Which is something that's quite interesting given the fact that Alexander never could run out of land to conquer. Conquering the Persians is the huge victory. It's the Greeks beating their main rival. It's them overthrowing the empire that had oppressed them for so long. Whereas the Persians had kind of come out and taken out the Babylonians without that same level. The Greeks come in and get revenge for Thermopylae. They get revenge for all the Persian mistreatment of the Greeks in Anatolia and in Greece itself. They get revenge for the sacking of Athens and all of that. But basically, Alexander acquires and integrates the Persian Empire into his growing empire. So now he controls all of Anatolia, most of the Transcaucasus regions like Armenia and areas like that. I believe he got there. Palestine, Syria, Egypt. He controls the Nile, which means he controls the breadbasket of the Eastern world, which will be important for the Romans later on. He controls Persia, which is a huge region with a lot of wealth and power coming from the Persians, and then and of course he has Greece and Macedon. So you think that he would be satisfied, but he's not. Conquest and the continual ability to defeat his enemies is high on his list. Another fun apocryphal story about Alexander is the Gordian knot. Supposedly, when Alexander was first starting out, a rumor came to him and his soldiers that there was the untiable knot that this was one of the tightest knots of rope ever tied, and if it could be cut or if it could be solved, this puzzle, the man who would solve it would rule the world. And it was in a temple, I think it might have been still in Greece or in Anatolia, and Alexander went there, and he doesn't figure out how to untie the knot, but he takes out his sword and cuts the knot in half. And of course, he does then proceed, that's probably apocryphal, but then he does proceed to conquer most of the world. Alexander is not interested in stopping. He pushes eastward into modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan and Pakistan, doing what he can to continually influence and grow the Greek Empire. He successfully conquers Afghanistan, but the Greeks will not hold on to it long term. However, Greek culture, art, and religion will be extremely influential in the empire that replaces Alexander. It's not a directly Grecian empire, but it's called the Bactari, and they are heavily influenced by the Greek conquerors under Alexander the Great. Alexander will get into India, and despite suffering some difficulties at the hands of the Gupta Empire, including some setbacks where his men were not able to defeat Indian elephants, Alexander is still excessively hell-bent on conquering as much of India as he possibly can. It would have been fascinating to see if he had lived, if he would have gone back there. The reason I say go back is because his men mutiny after a defeat and insist that he turn back. Alexander has been conquering for 12 to almost 13 years at this point. He has spent his entire life on his entire kingship moving eastward and building an empire, and he feels frustrated that he has to do this, but it's his men that stop him. Alexander is not defeated by an enemy like Napoleon or Julius Caesar were in some ways. No, he is forced to go back westward, and that's going to take him a while. While he's on his way back, It's kind of confusing exactly how it happens. I believe it's his wedding night or something like that. Alexander, by the way, wasn't had a no. It wasn't his wedding night. Alexander had a son. He was probably more homosexual than anything else, but as many young Greek men were at the time, at least heavily influenced by homosexual lifestyles, maybe even bisexual. Um, yeah, Julius Caesar was defeated when he was murdered, Harry. That's how that works. He wasn't defeated in battle, but he was defeated by his own hubris. But he's returning home. He has a young son. He has a wife. He's definitely probably calculating how he can go back. And he dies under mysterious circumstances. Some people say it's from syphilis. Some people say he dies of alcohol poisoning, some sort of stomach ailment. Nobody quite knows how he was how he dies. But Alexander dies suddenly. He's 33 years old, 323 BC. He's ruled for about 13 years, and during that time he has transformed the entire Greek world and the entire world around him, and will change history forever, because now Greek will become the most influential language, the most influential culture in the ancient world, even beyond that of the Romans in many ways, which I've already kind of highlighted. This spread of Hellenism by Alexander the Great's conquest is not undone by his death. Although his son is cheated out of taking over his empire because he's such a young child, his four generals decide to split it. Antonius, Ptolemy, Lysander, and I'm trying to remember the fourth one. And Seleucus. And I think Lysander was one of them. And Lysander, they split it up. One of them takes Greece. Antonius takes the Persian area, and Seleucus, who is the best general of Alexander's remaining generals, takes Turkey and Palestine and Syria, and Egypt is taken by the Ptolemies, and this will become the Ptolemaic dynasty, which will rule Egypt until it is conquered by the Romans, and basically the Egyptian pharaohdom or kingdom is done with after Augustus inculcates it into the growing Roman Empire. Yeah. No, he made a mistake, Harry. He made a mistake by trying to make himself dictator for life, and he was killed for it. It wasn't that he made a big mistake on the battlefield necessarily. Caesar was defeated in the sense that he was killed by his enemies. But what happens next? Alexander's death forces his generals into a split of the lands. Eventually, this is not good enough for Seleucus, that they think he was in a coma with an undetectable heartbeat. Okay, he was dead. And the new theory is wrong. Seleucus is eventually successful after decades of fighting at defeating Antonius. He basically gets Ptolemy to leave him alone, and he builds his own empire called the Seleucid Empire, which will have a predominant influence in Turkey, Persia, and Palestine and Syria for quite some time, until the rise of a new Persian empire called the Parthians really undermines that. So eventually Persia will get its own independence, and the Parthians will become a cheap rival to the Seleucids. And of course the Romans will wipe out the Seleucids for the most part, and the Parthians will remain one of Rome's greatest enemies, and pretty much the only enemy Rome couldn't conquer other than the Germans. Yes. Yes, of course, they didn't have that, but he was dead. So anyways, he was defeated by the senators who killed him. So Seleucus is actually able to create an empire. Ptolemy is doing his thing in Egypt. Greece is kind of left to its own devices and is kind of divided by different kings again. So Greece kind of reverts to a city-state-like dependent position. One of the kings, a man named Pyrrhus of Epirus, will become hell-bent on expanding Magna Graecia. Magna Graecia is a series of Grecian colonies to the west in Sicily and the southern part of Italy, including Naples, which was founded by the Greeks. That has created a huge ethnic and cultural difference between the southern part of the Italian peninsula and Sicily and the northern part of the Italian peninsula. And that continues to this day in many ways and is extremely influential in the development of Rome. Pyrrhus of Epirus is one of the kings who tries to expand Grecian influence in Magna Graecia in the Italian peninsula, and he's eventually defeated by the rising Romans. He beats them, but he loses. He wins his major battle against them, but he is so stretched out so thin that he is forced to retreat, and that is what's called a Pyrrhic victory, because he won, but he was so heavily hurt by his victory, he lost so much that he basically had to retreat. So when you have a Pyrrhic victory, you win, but at what cost? The cost is so formidable that you might as well have lost. And eventually the Romans are going to kick the Greeks out of Magna Graecia. During the Punic Wars, they will use the fighting with the Carthaginians to subdue all of Greece, all of the Grecian influence on Sicily, and take over Sicily. And so the Greek colonies in Magna Graecia are eventually absorbed into the growing Roman Republic, which will eventually turn its eye towards Greece and use different opportunities to conquer the vast majority of Greece itself, and then move on into Turkey and Anatolia and challenge the Seleucids. By the time of Julius Caesar and the rise of the Roman and the end of the Roman Republic, Greece is pretty much subdued, and much of the land that Alexander conquered and these kingdoms is taken over by the Romans, with the Ptolemies being the last to fall, with Mark Antony allying with his Ptolemaic queen and mistress, the pharaoh Cleopatra, one of the most beautiful and interesting women, who once again had a huge amount of influence culturally by the Greeks as well as by the Egyptians herself. So again, Greek influence builds leaders and important political figures and monarchs all throughout the ancient world, even long after the death of Alexander, thanks to people like Seleucus, Cleopatra, the Ptolemaic dynasties. And the Romans themselves are going to have, again, as I've mentioned probably too many times, a huge amount of influence thanks to the Greeks. Chariot races, religious imagery, the polytheism of the Romans themselves, where they changed the name of the Greek gods and heroes to their own. This is all based on the Greeks, and this is all taken from the Greeks. But even long before the Romans become a major threat to the Greeks, this is already spread all throughout the Middle East and Egypt, and as far as India, where Greek philosophy is harmonized in some parts, especially in modern-day Afghanistan, with in the Bactria Empire, with the growing Buddhism, which predates Alexander by about 3 centuries. You've got Indian history, you've got Afghan history, you have Egyptian history, you have all of this coalescing around the Greeks. You have the lingua franca being Greek, you have the polytheism of the Greeks being extremely popular with the Romans. Eventually the Greeks are subdued and become part of the Roman Empire when the Romans turned the Mediterranean into their own lake. First by, I forget the name of the war, there's a name for the series of the wars with the Greeks and the Romans. There's a very famous name. Starts with an A, I think. There's the Romans had the Punic Wars, which is how they conquered the western part of the Mediterranean, including Spain and North Africa. Then they have the eastern part of the Mediterranean, which is mainly their wars with the Greeks, and these are different offshoots of those 4 rulers who split the Greek empire after Alexander died, which is called the Diadoche. The Diadoche. Yeah, that's how you say it. So. And I did mention the Pyrrhic victories. I mentioned how Pyrrhus lost in Italy, or won, but basically had to retreat. So, where does that take us? Well, I've talked about the undue influence of the Greeks all over the world because of the conquest of Alexander, and then how the Romans basically took that and just copied and pasted in many, many ways. There's more, however. The Romans themselves their emperors during the time of the Caesars, see themselves as gods in the pantheon of the Greeks. Greek architecture is extremely influential. Take Hadrian and the building of the Pantheon, one of the most important buildings in all of the ancient world, which is just a temple dedicated to many different gods. And you once again have a Roman emperor heavily influenced by Greek culture. In fact, during the 2nd century, Roman emperors were known for growing beards and styling themselves after the Greeks. Marcus Aurelius, Antoninus Pius, and Hadrian himself were all heavily influenced by Greek philosophy and culture, and art, and even fashion. Togas, columns, all of these things, all Greek. I think I sound like the father from My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where he basically says anything is Greek. But in many ways, for the ancient world, it quite was. It's not that the Romans had no individuality or no contributions of their own. They had many great and wonderful and important ones. But their blueprint for all of this comes from the Greeks. And they probably would have never gotten there had Alexander not created a massive empire. When you have a massive empire with that amount of cultural influence, the later empires are going to say, what did they do right and how can we do that? And the Romans have this incredible ability, rather than imperializing their people, they let the Grecian influence stay because they have that Grecian influence themselves and kind of create business as usual. It's a growing theory of mine that the Romans are actually underrated for their tolerance, which sounds strange for the people who killed Jesus and the people who persecuted the Christian church and for some of the most despotic rulers of all time like Caligula and Commodus. But the Romans were actually had a system, especially during their heyday, the Pax Romana, where they tolerated different religions, tolerated different cultures, tolerated different languages, and kind of did their own thing, allowed people to do their own thing as long as they had fealty to the Roman emperor, and to the Roman system and to the Roman government. And the soldiers that protected the roads and the massive infrastructure of the Roman Empire indeed were natives of that land, and protecting citizens of very different cultures who, by one way or another, were probably heavily influenced by Alexander's conquest and the spread of Greek society and Greek religion and Greek history. I'm going to answer questions probably at the very end, but we're about 2/3 of the way through our live stream. What happens next? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Romans decline in the 3rd century until an emperor called Diocletian in the early 4th century decides the best thing to do to save the empire so that it's not stretched out is to divide it into 2 sectors, east and west, and 4 sectors, one governor, and basically you have 2 emperors, one a senior and one a junior emperor ruling in each half of the empire. And the eastern half of the empire will include Greece, it will include Anatolia, it will include Egypt, and it will include Palestine. And so and while they don't have control over all of Persia anymore like the Greeks did because of the Parthian Empire, which will turn into the Sassanid dynasty will replace the Parthians and be a major challenge to the Romans in the next few centuries, you have the development of an eastern part of the empire. Diocletian has a junior emperor in the west whose name is Constantius, and his son Constantine will, of course, win the famous Battle of the Milvian Bridge. He will legalize Christianity, and he will become the emperor of the West, and he will defeat, I forget the name of the emperor he defeats, and I think it might have been Maxentius, but he will unite all of the empire under his banner, create his own mini dynasty that lasts for a few decades after his death, and basically make it very clear that Christianity is the most predominant part, is the most de facto religion, is the de facto religion. It will become the official religion later on of the Roman Empire, but also that he is influenced by the Greeks. He is in the same vein as Julius Caesar, who was in the same vein as Alexander the Great, and basically, without making himself a god, seeks to glorify himself by taking this city, an ancient city called Byzantium, which the Greeks had named it. It's an ancient Greek city right by the Dardanelles, right between Greece and Turkey, and turning it into his own Nova Roma, a new capital. And that will be the city of Constantinople that will bear his name forever. Of course, now it's known as Istanbul. It's also called Zadisgrad, which I mentioned earlier. But the truth of the matter is, you really think of it, you think of Constantinople, and because of Constantine, who basically builds a great infrastructure in the eastern part of the empire. And the east has the breadbasket in Egypt. The east has all Greek culture, language, and society. So in many ways, that continues. And most of the people, especially in that part of the empire, speak Greek into the 4th and 5th centuries AD. In 395, after the death of the last great Roman emperor, at least in my opinion, in the West, a man named Theodosius, the empire is indeed split permanently between the East and the West with some sort of general feeling of beneficence between the two of them. 80 years later, Romulus Augustulus, the last Roman emperor, will be deposed in the west by Odoacer, who will create a kingdom in Italy. All of the different areas of the Western Roman Empire are divided up by various barbarians. I've talked about this a lot on the channel before. Check out my series on the Roman emperors. Then you have the East left to its own devices. Byzantium, Constantinople is the capital of the East, and you have a perpetuation, once again, of Greek language, of Greek culture, of Greek society, of Greek history, Greek philosophy, now merged with the predominant religion, the official religion, Christianity, heavily influencing and stabilizing and being the guiding force for the new empire on the block, the Eastern Roman Empire, also named after that ancient city, the Byzantine Empire. And that is where you get an emperor like Justinian in the 6th century, who will build his own legal code based on the Romans, but also based on the Greeks. The development in Christianity, which is the predominant force in both a Western and Eastern empire, will see the eastern part continue to rely on the ancient Greek language and culture and philosophy, which was so heavily important to the earliest Christians who come from the eastern part of the empire and who speak and write Greek, and the New Testament being written in Greek seems to give them an advantage. However, the rise of Rome, especially after the Western Roman Empire collapses, the rise of the prominence of the Pope will create a divide. Eventually, in 1054, this will lead to the split between the Byzantine Orthodox Church and the Greek Orthodox, multiple different Orthodox churches, and of course the Western Roman Catholic Church. Why is this significant? Because once again, Greek culture, language, and philosophy has heavily influenced the development of not a physical kingdom or empire, but a spiritual one in the Christian church, and in fact becomes a dividing mark for the sectarianism within that Christian church between the Roman Catholics and the Greek Orthodox. So there's something to consider as well. So Greek culture and influence continues. The Byzantine Empire, the continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Greece, speaking Greek, based on Greek culture and civil philosophy, continues until it is destroyed by the Ottomans in 1453 when Constantinople falls. So, that's basically where I'm going to wrap it up. I think that's basically all I wanted to discuss about the Greeks. I could go on and on. There's just so much there. But now hopefully you've seen not just the importance of Greek society, civilization, and history, but you also see the importance of the Greek language and how that has transpired, not just during their own time, but continue to have a huge amount of influence even after the Greeks had been conquered and assimilated and changed their religion and all sorts of things had changed. Greek continued to be a huge matter in geopolitics until into the 15th century. And of course, Greek food, Greek language. There's a lot of great stuff to talk about in Greek society. Eventually, the Greeks will become part of the Ottoman Empire. They will eventually get their own independence in the 1830s, and they continue in that state to this day. So, you could say the Greeks do not start off necessarily as a Eurocentric people. They are mainly from the Middle East and the Asian steppes who migrate. The Sea Peoples are also probably mixed in there as well, but they eventually do become considered a European society, so they are considered Caucasian. And I've already talked about how the United States and a lot of Western Europe was heavily influenced by Greek philosophy, and also Greek architecture was extremely popular during the founding of the United States, which is why so many American buildings are built just like the buildings of the ancient Greeks, including, but not limited to, the U.S. Capitol and even the White House. Let me see if I can get a background of that. But anyways, here's the Supreme Court building. You can see the Corinthine columns and the structures. That's called the frieze, where you have those men there, and then you have the atrium, which is that little triangle at the top. And that's all Greek culture, using stone and concrete. The Greeks were master builders. They really were. I think that should wrap it up for talking about ancient Greece. I've got about 10 minutes of Q&A, so does anyone... do you know the Greeks were Indian descendants? Probably not. The Indo-Aryan people were probably prolific in the population of Greece, but they were also prolific in the populating of the Hittite Empire and also in India. That doesn't necessarily make the Greeks Indian. Can you do a video on Diogenes? Probably. I believe that's the Greek philosopher who died laughing, who was known for telling jokes. But yes, now I've got 10 minutes. I'll answer any questions you have about history and social studies, and then we'll call it a day. And everybody can go off to a great week, and we'll be back here Friday and Saturday of next week for our Q&A, and then next Sunday you guys will be able to vote next weekend about what live stream lecture topic I do next Sunday. Who is Benny's hot sister? Like you'd like to know. Why did the Romans adopt other religions so willingly, but they opposed Christianity? Very good question. Other religions were polytheistic, and for the Romans, adding gods to their pantheon was easy. Christianity was unique because it demanded the worship of only one god and refused to allow the Roman gods, and more importantly, during the time of Christianity, it refused to acknowledge Caesar was God. Will you lose the tie? No. It's nice formal wear. I actually really like the tie. But yes. So, the only reason there's any Benny sister is because there was a guy who came on the channel and started trolling me about bullying me in high school named Benny, or he asked, did I remember him from high school? People do this all the time, and I said no, but I remember your hot sister. And yes, I am a brunette type of guy. Why would I be a blonde type of guy? No offense to blondes. I've met many beautiful blonde people, but I've got brown hair. I like brown hair. There's nothing wrong with it. Can we get back to the history? Who has a question about social studies or history? I will answer it. Redheads, you can't go wrong with our redheads. You're very, very Irish of you, Bale. But yeah, so there is no hot sister. I'm not saying there isn't. What's your favorite Greek dish? I love the orzo rice and some chicken. Yeah, they did. I mean, they did in ancient Greece too. I mentioned a little bit about the Greeks' proclivities for orgiastic behavior, and they're known for being a more homosexual society than many of the ancient world. Homosexuality, bisexuality, and intergenerational relationships, yes, I'm saying that, but existed before the Greeks. The Greeks did practice this in some form, regardless of which city, state you were in. It was common for affairs to be practiced, particularly between men. You also have Lesbos, you have Sappho, the famous Greek female poet who was attracted to women, so Sapphic people are mainly women, but also men who are only attracted to women. But yeah. So you can't talk about the history of Greece without at least mentioning some of that. I talked about it last week, but I'm also mentioning it here. Did Nazi Germany defeat the Greeks? The Nazis and the fascists believed that they were carrying on what the Romans and the Greeks would have wanted, and they were using the militarism of Alexander the Great, but particularly the Romans, because Mussolini really gets the ball rolling. It's an Italian phenomenon more than anything else, and the Greeks kind of have an implicit part in that. And yes, Harry, please stop asking who did what to who. Not Harry, my moderator, this other Harry we have in the chat. You need to give Rodolfo a 60-second timeout for bullying Frog. How did he bully Frog? I don't know. Let me see if there's anything in the chat I can answer. I find it odd American legal building have a lot of fasces litros. Not surprised. Did you get a girl for the prom? Yes. Yes, I did. Greeks invented sex, Romans added women. Yes, that's basically the joke. Why was I placed in the timeout corner? Oh, I don't know. You said it. I don't know why. I heard the Romans discovered plastics, but they killed the dude because they thought it was magic. That sounds like something the Romans would do. Does capitalism without socialism create fascism? No, not necessarily. Laissez-faire capitalism is not fascism. Fascism is not capitalistic. You can't be capitalistic and authoritarian. You can't have a free market with an authoritarian system. Lombards in southern Italy too, mainly north in Italy when they conquered it in the 5th century. Yeah, why did the Greeks play a major role in the nomenclature of space objects? I don't. Why in the nomenclature? Well, it's Roman language to refer to the planets. Apollo is the god of the sun. I don't know why the Apollo missions were named after him, but obviously it's a callback to the important influence of Greek science and scientific discovery. Some of the most important scientists of the ancient world were Greek. Ptolemy, who charted the planets and was one of the earliest astronomers, was an Egyptian, but lived in the Hellenistic world of his time. Miletus. I believe there was one who came up with, it might have been Miletus, who first proposed evolution as a theory, thousands of years before Darwin. You, of course, have Aristotle, who was huge into natural philosophy, which is science. And then you also have Archimedes, Pythagoras, and Euclid, the major mathematicians who all, especially Pythagoras, dabbled with scientific ideas. Since there was a progressive era, we agreed we are in a conservative era started by Reagan. Reagan shifted America to the center-right, to be sure, and made America more of a center-right country because it looked like that was what was helping them defeat the Soviets. And that's not fully incorrect to say that. Are Roman and Greeks different people? Yes. The Romans styled themselves after the Greeks, but they would have considered the Greeks to be far inferior to them. Love your channel. Thanks for all the historical birthdays that you updated us. It actually helps me because often things are matching up from the past to present times. Keep it up. Absolutely. We do daily birthdays, daily deaths, and daily history. Why all credit goes only to Romans for the development of the legal system? The Greeks had it, but the Romans had a law code that was extraordinarily strident and far more systematic and systematized than the Greeks. Can I be mod? Keep coming back. We'll see, Nolan. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Is that a conservative error? Definitely aberrations from it. No one is going how we can be out of conservative, the other in the progressive era. It was literally who is more progressive. I don't know what you're saying, Harry, because despite the fact that you are an Englishman, you are not speaking English. What's your favorite civilization? When I look at the ancient world, I have to go with the Romans just because of their dominance, but I love the Greeks. How bad were Soviet gulags? Read Solzhenitsyn. They were pretty awful. They were worse than Alcatraz in many ways. Are you atheist? Do you like philosophy? Do you have ambition? I love philosophy. I have ambition for you to like and subscribe to this channel, General Waddle. That's why I'm answering your question. And I don't talk about religion. If you want my particular perspective on a religious idea, give a super chat. Religion and politics, I will talk about. I will give an analysis from a historical perspective, but usually only after a super chat. But the truth of the matter is, I have said before that I do believe that there is a God. I just haven't explained what I think by that. So I'm not an agnostic or an atheist, but I do respect and understand why people are skeptical. As a historian, my job is to be skeptical. Frog Lover, good to see you. Thank you. We'll see, Nolan. We've got a lot of moderators, and they do a lot of great stuff. You got to be able to delete comments. You got to be able to put social media handles. What I would love for a moderator to do is to find links to videos and put them in the chat so that people can go and watch them, particularly the long-form videos, because we need more traffic there. But if we could get a moderator who can go into YouTube during the live stream, find, copy and then paste the links to the videos. Nolan, if you could do that, that would be fantastic. Would you agree with me Winfield Scott was the most important military commander in U.S. history? No one would agree with you. The Romans copied off of Greeks and Etruscans love it all. Yeah, to be fair. Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Still doing this, but on a bigger platform. And whoever said I'm the next Charlie Kirk, this isn't what Charlie Kirk did. You can do that. That would be very helpful, Hars. Lewis, good to see you. I think you've just joined us right at the end as we're wrapping up. We've only got about 5 more minutes of Q&A, but we did do our live stream lecture on the ancient Greeks part 2. So it's a 2-part live stream lecture. The first 2-parter we've done, I think, since Winston Churchill. Remember me Friday and I'll do it? Okay. Hars, can you now go and get the video on Alexander the Great and the city-states of Athens and Sparta and put them both in the chat? That would be very helpful. Did the Romans copy off of everyone else? And no, they didn't fully copy off of everyone else. They had their own things. The Romans had several different deities that were not Greek. Did you write any research paper? Yes, I have a master's. That means I've written a master's thesis, and I have a bachelor's, which means I wrote a senior thesis. So yes, I've had both, but I've written more than just those things. Yes, Hars is from the United States. Yeah, but they would improve and build on what they would copy from, and the whole reason they would build and copy is to make things. They found what worked and didn't want to. Their idea was not to reinvent the wheel. Does socialism without capitalism become? I don't know what you mean, Daniel. I already answered that. What were your research papers about? My master's thesis, which I wrote last year, was about the Great Game, Russia and Great Britain's Cold War to control Afghanistan and Persia in the 19th century. Do you think slingers are better than archers in siege battles? No. And the main reason I believe that is because archers replace slingers. Socialism without capitalism become communism. Yes and yes. You know what not to demean the Romans, but Alexander was defeated many times. He was not that great. Well, it's the Greeks that you would be demeaning because he was a Greek general, and Alexander lost a lot of battles, and so did many generals. But Alexander has probably the best, if not the second or third best track record of generals ever. Slinging is way harder. Yes, of course I am. A gas lamp from ancient Greece from 150 to 200 AD depicts a woman having sex with a donkey. In the 1970s, it became a common for women to have sex with. Steve, do you just show up to just put random stuff that will get me demonetized? Because that's random stuff that will get me demonetized. And not help the algorithm at all. So, let's see. Does anyone else have a question about history or social studies? We've got 2 minutes left. So if anyone has something they want to ask, you should smile more. Well, thanks, but I don't see the need to right now. I'm talking about a serious topic. I'm, of course, friendly neighborhood history, but I'm not, just going to smile at weird times. Yeah. Do you think that we will find Cleopatra's tomb next year? I think they are getting closer with the tunnel they found. Possibly. And there's a Spartan Athens video. Thank you so much, Hars. So if you guys want more details about, oh, you had it. Why is it gone? Can you do a video on Diogenes? I've already said that I would. Oh. Does Constitution approve our army to conquer new lands to be added to the USA? Basically, you put the president in charge as the commander-in-chief. It didn't specify one way or another. Unless there's something saying the United States cannot expand its land, then it's allowed to. And that's the Sparta and Athens video that Hars put in the chat. So please go watch that when you're done to learn some more. I don't believe the head archaeologist of Egypt is corrupt. Could be. We'll see if they find anything about Cleopatra. Good job, Hars. Thanks, Zephyr. I think Muslims is the most corrupted because Islam has not evolved, because if you try to do so, you will be killed. Islam did plenty of evolution during their golden age. Islam has had incredible moments of progress and development. And if you don't believe me, ask Maimonides, who was not a Muslim but a Jew, but preferred to live with the Muslims than with the Christians in the Middle Ages. So, one more minute. Any more questions? I'm woke up way too early for a Sunday, so I need a nap after this. Can you do a video on Sparta Constitution compared to Athens Constitution? Yeah, but we all know the American Constitution is the best, and that's all that really matters, Harry. Do you have detailed knowledge about geometrical significance among different civilizations? Triangles, points, pyramids seem to be common in almost every civilization, and that's why Euclidean geometry is such a big thing. Um, uh, does Russia come under Europe? Yes, I consider Russia to be part of Europe. And the reason why I do is because Russia was hell-bent throughout much of its history to be as European as they possibly could. Um, there we go. Okay. So, now the UK written constitution, no, the UK unwritten constitution is better. Yes, which is why it's unwritten. Is it true Russia had a no bread rule? I'm not sure. Most of a democracy came from a manuscript named Mansumetri. I think I've heard that before. Our constitution is literally the basis of everything that your constitution has. Yes, but yeah, except like the First Amendment, which is, I mean, it's an implicit constitution the English have with a Bill of Rights, but it's not. But it's built upon by the Americans in their own way. Of course, it's a good constitution. It's just not talked about nearly enough. But that doesn't mean have a no bread rule. Are you talking about bread lines? This is a piece of history you're intentionally ignoring. No, I am not, Zephyr. Get your mind out of the gutter and stop yelling in your responses. Thank you for keeping history alive so our future generations don't repeat the same mistakes from our past. It's important that we continue to learn and grow from our past mistakes. True, that is a side benefit for me for history, but that's not why I do history. I do history because I love learning about the human condition, and history talks about it. Briefly explain what exactly is French Revolution. 1789, the French overthrow their king, start a process in which they overthrow their king. The revolution becomes more and more radical as time goes on. It's eventually commandeered by a group called the Jacobins, which kill tons of people. They create a new calendar. They defrock many members of the church. They destabilize the authority of the Catholic Church in France. It leads to a series of chaos and violence, especially during the Reign of Terror led by the Jacobins and the Committee of Public Safety, which did not ensure any of that. And eventually Napoleon is able to rise because he's a successful general in the ranks and basically thwart the revolution and make himself emperor. There you go. And it starts with the tennis court oath, June 30th, 1789. Go and check out my video on the French Revolution. No, Harry doesn't agree with you there, Hars. I mean, I can go to and criticize the government, the king, companies, whoever I want. I just can't go around insulting people for no reason. Yes, which is why the American Constitution is better than the English one, because I can say that you're stupid and you can't say it. And you guys have all sorts. See, I'm a free speech absolutist. So the best part of the U.S. Constitution is the freedom of speech. Saying that you can't say, people should be allowed to say whatever they want, basically, without harming individuals. And I can't be that mean to you, Harry, so I'll just settle for stupid right now. It's a UK victory. What's the mystery about Stonehenge? Nobody knows who built it, and nobody knows how they could build it. I think the British just got tired of fighting the war and just went home. And they really didn't need to fight the war after defeating Napoleon, because the whole impressment issue was over, and the Americans had already lost their capital, and people who lose their capital do not win wars. I could go say that you're stupid. Yes, but you won't. Even Harry has a more reasonable view than you, friendly history. Yes, that's fascinating. Let me see here. And there you go. Okay. So anyways, sorry. I guess I'm not totally for free speech, but I had to do that because Hars was being obsequious. And Harry, I can also say obsequious in this country. So anyways, I think you should study more about the unknown mysteries. I'll try. The Germans are the best people. Okay. You just can't go around calling black people racial slurs or gay people homophobic slurs. It's pretty fair law. Yeah, hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. I don't agree. I don't like hate speech, but I know how subjective hate speech can be. The American Constitution is a pile of, and that's more, and what's more, you know it. Yes. Thank you, Rick, for wasting your time by writing that. Yes, Hars has been stuck on that entire War of 1812 thing the entire weekend and basically refusing to let it go. He's a dog with a bone, and when I offer, and he doesn't, and he even thinks that because I won't change my mind because I don't agree with his arguments, that makes me disingenuous. This would be fascinating if this was someone who came to the channel like Evan used to do and just fight with me, but this is one of my own moderators. So if I can't keep my moderators in line doing their thing, how can I keep the rest of the channel going? How many people do you think died during the French Revolution? Maybe up to 1 million, dark time. Maybe 10 or 20,000, if you're not counting the wars they fought with the other Europeans at the time. Okay, E-Dog, we'll go with that. UK Constitution is corrupted. The government didn't care until the royal family is affected. UK Constitution is corrupted. The government didn't care until... Why are you just copying and pasting yourself? The US Constitution is ignored when courts that can't enforce their will and an executive that can act without the legislature whenever it wants. At least our Constitution says the government can't do whatever the heck it wants until I caught all the legislature gets around to blocking it. I'm sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of your king still being around. And over the fact that you have, 900 years of authoritarianism in the form of monarchy? Sorry. Anyways, to be fair, the British did create the first restrictions on a king, or the first major restrictions on a king that eventually became the basis for consent of the governed in the Magna Carta. So you can't have the American Constitution without the Magna Carta or English common law, or of course the development of the English Constitution in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. And that's a good history place to stop. We will be back Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern for the next Q&A, then Saturday, and then you guys get to vote next weekend on the topic you want to hear from me next Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Our King Charlie ceremony has literally no influence on policy or government. That's not what you've said before. You're actually contradicting what you said before. You've talked about the influences of the king in specific. Who would win? Ancient Romans versus Aztecs. The Romans. Freedom of speech is existing, but the Constitution does not protect us from repercussions of free speech. Why? Because people are allowed in their own private businesses to say, you're not allowed to say that, you need to leave. That's a very simple thing. I think they're allowed to say that without legal punishment, but they're not allowed to say that without social punishment. Scotland is a land of, oh geez, E-Dog. That's just terrible. Sorry, Noah, we're about to end. We just did a live stream lecture on ancient Greece. Your American education is mired in such dishonesty. You must be a narcissist to believe confidence spells competence. How dare you? Yes, how dare I be confident? It's legal. It's legally has a lot of power, but in reality has none. That's not what you've said. You're contradicting yourself again. Was there something before the construction of federalism? Yes, monarchies and feudalism. Without the Haitian War, would the USA have expanded westward? No. Well, yes, actually. On paper, it has tons of authority and extraordinary limited circumstances to exercise authority. Yes, I'm very well aware. Okay, Parliament is literally known as the mother of parliaments. That's true. The British did create parliaments and then forced all the countries that they exploited and imperialized to adopt parliaments too. And I'm an Anglophile. I spent all of this weekend, Harry, defending the British and talking about how the British won the War of 1812. I just don't like these overinflated nationalistic views of history. You can be a nationalist on your own, but I know you're a national socialist, so there's that too. Just like those guys in Germany in the 30s. But the point in the matter is, they call themselves national socialists. But the truth of the matter is, I've spent all weekend defending the British and talking about how great they did in the War of 1812. I don't like this nationalistic way of history where it's my country has never done anything wrong because I love my country. They can't do anything wrong. No, you don't know. I'm sorry, but if you have that perspective of history and you use that as how you interpret the lens of history and the history of your country, you are going to be stilted in your historical development. I'm sorry. What's your personal take on UFOs? They exist. I don't know if that means they're aliens or not. They could be. Was there something before the Constitution? I mean, yes. In the U.S., there was this idea of following the English Constitution from the Glorious Revolution, which is kind of an implied constitution, but the English do have their own Bill of Rights. And said that she had to inform her as head of state. Okay, that's fine. What happened to Jimmy Kimmel? Is it correct or wrong according to you? Again, that's a current issue. If you want me to share my perspective on it and a deep analysis, give me a super chat. Check out my daily news updates for more. But yes, Jimmy Kimmel has at least temporarily lost his job because of his joke about Charlie Kirk, which I think is interesting, to say the least. There's a lot of things to go back and forth with. I also don't think Jimmy Kimmel is particularly funny, so I think he should just lose his job just in general because he's not funny. But there's that. But who knows? But is it justified, them doing this? I don't know. Give me a super chat and then we'll talk about it. That's how it works. I don't talk about current issues and stuff like that. I've talked about it way too much. So yes, well on paper, the monarch has a lot of authority. The exercise basically none of it. Yes, I'm very well aware of it. I am the one that told you that, Harry. And whenever, because on the one day that I say the monarch has no power, you're like, well, technically, and then when on the power day I say your monarch has too much power, you say, well, technically. So yes, Maddie is technically correct, but you don't need to scream that. And the last time the king ever blocked a law was in 1707. It wasn't even the king; it was the Queen Anne. Yes, I know what Queen Anne did. Do you believe in some of the, she was the lover of Winston Churchill's ancestor, a woman. Do you believe in some of the out-of-place artifacts? Probably not. All right, that sounds like Anunnaki stuff to me. Where do you rank influence of power, lust leaders, influence on Quran? What? The Quran has more than just lust and power in it, to be sure. I don't know. Maybe a 3. Caps don't mean you're screaming snowflake. You using all caps to communicate your message proves you are the snowflake. Projection is a psychological disorder where you take your own behaviors and conditions and apply them to someone else. Where do you rank influence of power lust leaders? I don't know what you're saying. I really don't. Do you know any written papers in history that elaborate or describe dreams? Tons of histories describe dreams. The Trojan War, which we talked about last week, was started supposedly by a dream. Look up what Homer says about dreams in the Iliad. Because you can't say the king doesn't have any power because that isn't true. They have ceremonial and paper power. But they don't. So I'm not allowed to say what you just said right now? Do 10 billion push-ups. Give me $10 billion. You read the facts, you're educated, isn't resolved to solve future challenges, that's okay. Okay, whatever. But you also can't say that the king is the embodiment of the state and holds total or a lot of authority. Yes, he is supposed to be the head of the state. He is technically the head of state. That's his title. Does the Constitution say abortion is not allowed? The Constitution does not necessarily say one thing or another about abortion. Roe v. Wade, the judges said that there was a constitutional right to an abortion because certain women, particularly of color, were discriminated against because they could not have easier access to abortion. So it became a women's rights thing. And then the Dobbs decision basically said this debate is still going on about the personhood of the fetus. So therefore, we can't speak to it. You may not like it, but dude is right on top of a lot of things. I do my best. It is where they have paper authority, ceremonial authority, and traditional authority, but they don't have any practical authority. Yes, I know. Did Islamic leaders influence and modify Quran to their convenience? Uthman very well might have done that when discarding all of the other remnants and making his own universal copy of the Quran that eventually became the first major one was the Kufic or Samarkand. What if I traveled back in time 10,000 years ago and stepped on a butterfly? I have no idea. Maybe I'd be speaking German right now. Do you know about Tamil, one of the world's oldest languages? Yes, spoken predominantly in the southern Indian continent and in Ceylon or Sri Lanka. Rumi is one of my favorite poets. You don't have to be Muslim to hear the beauty in his words. He is very good. I wish we could all respect each other's religions and politics. We're all humans. We respect all that stuff. So yes, what you said is right, but it contradicts what you said before. So what you said before was wrong. But anyways, when you say the king has a lot of power, you're incorrect. When you say the king has no power, you're also incorrect. The king has a lot of power. He just doesn't have the ability to exercise any of it. He's a figurehead. That's how ceremonial monarchies work. Was the Spanish War really about the price of bananas? Spanish War? Which one? I don't know. The history of the Mongolian Empire and Khan is crazy. It is. It is. I've gone 10 minutes over just to talk to all of you lovely people. I really appreciate everybody coming. Make sure to like and subscribe on your way out. I'm going to sign off now. We'll be back Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, and Saturday, 6 p.m. Eastern for Q&A. And next Sunday, live stream lecture. You get to vote about it exclusively here on YouTube. I've already explained the history of dreams, Neil. I'm not going to talk about it more. People have been having dreams for all of human history. Yes, well, Rick, tell that to Harry, the Harry from a few weeks ago who told me he has a lot of power. So anyways, so we'll be back Friday, Saturday, Sunday next week, but also check out the long form videos that drop every Monday and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, and then you've got the daily updated videos on the channel all the time. Yeah, no, he can't really. He can speak and try to make influence, but yeah. Anyways, so let's see here. I'm gonna end there. Hopefully Harsh will be back later, and maybe next week we'll put Harry in timeout. But anyways, thanks everyone for a really good discussion and for listening to me talk about the ancient Greeks. Check out all of the videos we have here on the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Have a great week. Take care, and as always, love history. Bye-bye now.